So, hi everyone. So in our previous class, in our previous presentation, so we covered many examples with respect to try and catch block. So we covered many programs. So first program I covered is how we can resolve the exception in my catch block. Try block ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾದ್ರು exception raise ಆಗಿದ್ರೆ catch block ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ತರ resolve ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬಹುದು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ explain ಮಾಡಿದೆ. Then later on I explained, suppose if an arithmetic exception is getting raised. So what happens if I'm trying to use different exception handler? Array index out of bound exception handler use ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರೆ ಏನ್ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಆಗ್ಬೋದು ಅದನ್ನ ನೋಡಿದ್ವಿ. Then I explained the usage of print writer class. Print writer class na ಯಾವ ತರ it is connected to system output. So ನಾನು ಏನಾದ್ರು ಕಂಟೆಂಟ್ ನ system output, that means monitor ಮೇಲೆ print ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅಥವಾ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಒಂದು ಕಂಟೆಂಟ್ ನ ಒಂದು ಫೈಲ್ ಗೆ ರೈಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದ್ರೆ I can make use of print writer class. Then we saw two important exceptions that might get raised during file access. ಒಂದು file not found exception, ಇನ್ನೊಂದು null pointer exception. So ಎರಡು important class ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಾವು ನೋಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ವಿ. We saw two important class. First one is file reader class. Second one is buffered reader class. So when you try to read content from a path which is not available, then it reads to file not available exception, file not found exception. In a similar manner, if you try to write to a file which has only read permission, ಯಾವ್ದಾದ್ರು ಫೈಲ್ಗೆ ಬರೀ ರೀಡ್ ಪರ್ಮಿಷನ್ ಇದೆ ಬಟ್ ನೀವು ರೈಟ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಟ್ರೈ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ, ಅವಾಗ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಇಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಜನರೇಟ್ ಫೈಲ್ ನಾಟ್ ಫೌಂಡ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್. ಸೊ ಒನ್ಸ್ an object is created for file reader, then if no file is obtained, then buffered reader will also contain, buffer reader will not contain anything because your file reader object itself won't contain anything. That's why buffer reader object will also not contain anything. That's why it leads to null pointer exception. So these were the two major exceptions programs we covered in our previous class. So we shall continue further with respect to exception handling. There are many different keywords available still with respect to exception handling. So far we have covered only the two major keywords, that is try and catch. So in this particular class we shall try to cover the next keywords. So the next keyword is, so this keyword you are already familiar, that is the catch keyword, but there is some variations you can use with respect to catch. Let us try to understand that variation. First one is multi-catch. That means in your program, there might be chances that multiple exceptions are getting created. In a single program, ಒಂದು single program ಒಳಗೆ multiple exceptions ಗಳು create ಆಗೋ chances ಇರುತ್ತೆ. So if multiple exceptions are getting created in your program, then you need multiple catch blocks. So because ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು exception handle ಮಾಡಕ್ಕೆ you need a corresponding catch block. So that is what is called as multiple catch block. So as you can see in the definition, a try block can be followed by one or more catch blocks. Each catch block will contain different exception handler. That means one catch block, it might contain arithmetic exception handler. Another catch block, it might contain array index out of bound exception. Another catch block, it might contain file not found exception handler. Another catch block, it might contain null pointer exception handler. So if our code is generating different type of exception and try block ಒಳಗಿರೋ code, if it is generating different types of exception, then we should definitely use different types of exception handlers. Because ನನ್ನ ಕೋಡ್ ಒಳಗೇನೆ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ different types of exceptions generate ಆಗ್ತಾ ಐತೆ. To handle those different types of exceptions, I need different exception handlers. But there are some points you need to remember. Those points are, first one, at any point of time, only one exception can occur. That means inside a single piece of code, even though if it can generate multiple exception, ಆ code multiple exceptions ನ generate ಮಾಡಬಹುದು, ಆದ್ರೂ ಸಹ only one exception will be thrown. Only one exception will be thrown and only one catch block will get executed. This is the first point you need to remember. At a time, only one exception occurs, and at a time, only one catch block will be executed. Jotege, whenever your catch block is getting executed, none catch block execute agbekadre, we should always write our catch block from specific exception handler to general exception handler. What do you mean by that? All catch blocks must be ordered from specific to most general. That means catch for arithmetic exception must come before catch for exception class. ಈ arithmetic exception catch block ಮೊದಲು ಬಂದಿರಬೇಕು. This arithmetic exception is a subclass of exception. That's why this is generic. ಈ exception ಅನ್ನೋ parent class ಒಳಗೆ ಸುಮಾರು sub class ಇರ್ತವೆ. This is specific. So specific exception class should come first. Later on, the generic exception class should come. So these are the 2 points you need to remember whenever you are writing multiple catch blocks. So first of all, why you need multiple catch blocks? In a single piece of code which is in try block, it can generate multiple exceptions. So in order to handle all those exceptions, you need multiple catch blocks. But at any one point of time, only one exception will be thrown and the corresponding catch block, corresponding one catch block will be executed. Adon catch block execute agutte. Then always you should write your catch block from specific exception handler to general exception handler. That means the arithmetic exception handler should be written first, then you should write the parent class exception handler which is of type exception. Idana amel baribeku. So in order to understand how this multiple catch block will work, let us write a sample program. So we are writing a sample program in which 2 exceptions are getting generated. First one is arithmetic exception, second one is array index out of bound exception. So even though 2 exceptions can get generated, only one of the exception will be thrown and that will be handled by the corresponding catch block. So when we write this particular Java program, you will get a clear picture how multiple catch will work another one clear picture sigutte. Now let us go to our Eclipse. So these are the different packages we have created so far for the recent classes. So this package was for encapsulation and polymorphism. This package was for abstraction and interfaces. Now we are with the package exception handling. So these were the programs we covered in the previous classes. Now I will try to create a class in this particular package. So let me name the class as multiple catch. I am naming the class as multiple catch. Finish. So here I will write the main method, ma control space main method. Then I will go to the try block. Inside try block, I will write a piece of code. I will write some information. Let us write that particular information. I am creating an array. This is an integer array which can hold 5 elements. If it can hold 5 elements, the index will be from 0 to 4. The index will be from 0 to 4. Then what I am doing? I am trying to access index 5. Then I am trying to divide a number by 0. So as you can see in this particular statement, it generates 2 exceptions. It can generate 2 exceptions. First one, this will generate arithmetic exception. That value you are going to assign to 5th index of the array, which is not available. The index is only available till 4. So it will generate arithmetic exception as well as array index out of bound exception. But at a time, only one exception will be thrown, that is your arithmetic exception will be thrown. So here we need to write two catch block. We need to write two catch block. First catch block I will write for the arithmetic exception. Arithmetic exception. SYSO E. I will print a description of that arithmetic exception which is been thrown. Second catch block I will write for array index out of bound array index out of bound exception. Array index out of bound exception. I'll print a description of that particular exception which will be thrown. Next, suppose if there is other exceptions other than arithmetic exception and array index out of bound exception, if there is some other exception which gets generated, then that needs to be handled by a parent exception handler. So I will also write the parent exception handler. I am writing the parent exception handler. Parent exception handler. So as you can see from the catch block, multiple catch blocks, I am writing my catch block from specific exception handler to generic exception handler. This were the specific exception handler types. This one is the generic exception handler. Then what I will do, I will try to print a statement. If my exception was handled successfully, this code will get executed. Rest of the code, this will get printed. So what happens here, when you go to the try block, this can generate two types of exception. That means it will generate arithmetic exception. Also, it can generate array index out of bound exception. But at any one point of time, only one exception will be thrown. Since the first exception which is getting generated is arithmetic exception, that will be thrown and that will be suitably handled by this particular catch block. Then it will go to this particular statement and it will print rest of the code. Let us run this particular program and check our output. So if I go to the console and check, as you can see, this particular expression will generate arithmetic exception that was thrown, that is caught by this particular catch block. Description of that particular exception is printed, java.lang.arithmetic exception divide by 0. Then it will go to this particular statement and it will print the rest of the code. So this is how you need to write your multiple catch block. Let us understand multiple catch in detail with some more example. Let us go to the second example. Suppose if there is no exception handling of the specific type. So you are generating an exception, but there is no exception handling of specific type. Then what will happen? Then the parent exception handler will get called. So ನಾನು ಯಾವುದೇ specific type ಇರುವಂತ exception handler ನ ಬರ್ದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೆ then my parent exception handler will get called. So before going into that particular program, I will make a slight change to this particular example. So as you can see, now I given 30 divided by 2. What will happen now? It will only generate array index out of bound exception, because 30 divided by 2, it won't generate arithmetic exception. Now array index out of bound exception will be generated. That particular object will be thrown, reference will be thrown, then this catch block gets executed. If I run this particular program now and check my console, as you can see, it is printing array index out of bound exception. Index 5 is out of bounds for length 5, because when your array length is 5, the index will be from 0 to 4, but you are trying to access the index 5. That's when exception gets generated in this particular statement. Then it will be caught by this particular catch block. Then the rest of the code statement gets printed. So in our second program, what we are trying to achieve, we won't provide specific exception handler. So in case the specific exception handler is not provided, then the exception will be handled in the parent exception handler. Adi yav reeti anta we shall try to see. So I will go to the same package, exception handling, new class. Let me create a package. Let me create a package called as multiple catch. Sorry, class. I'm creating a class called as multiple catch 2. So I will write my main method. So after writing the main method, I will create a try block. Inside my try block, I will create a string. I will create a string and assign that particular string s to null. So the variable s, which is of string data type, is now null. Now I will try to perform some operation on this particular null string variable. So whenever you try to perform an operation on a null variable, it generates null pointer exception. So this variable s is null. For this variable s, you are trying to perform an operation. Therefore, it will generate an exception called as null pointer exception. Now what I will do, I will write the catch block. I will write my catch block. So I will write a catch block for handling arithmetic exception. Arithmetic exception. Then I will write a catch block for handling array index out of bound exceptions. For handling array index out of bounds exception. Then I will write a catch block with parent exception handler. Then I will write a catch block with parent exception handler. I am writing a catch block with parent exception handler. Then I will have a last statement. So if my exception is handled properly, it will come to this statement. Then it will print the rest of the code. If my exception is not properly handled, then it won't come to this particular statement. I am printing the rest of the code. So it should get printed within double quotes. So let us analyze what actually happens here. So this is a variable s which is of string data type that you have assigned to null. You are trying to perform an operation which does not contain anything, that is null. So this will generate null pointer exception. So this will generate null pointer exception. This will generate null pointer exception. That exception will be thrown. The exception created will be thrown. Since a null pointer exception is generated, it cannot be handled by this catch block. It also cannot be handled by this catch block. Therefore, your null pointer exception will go to the parent exception handler. There, the exception will be handled suitably and the description of that exception object will be printed. Then this particular rest of the code statement will execute. So let us run this particular program. So if I try to run this particular program and check the console, as you can see, it is generating a null pointer exception, cannot invoke string.length because your s is null. You cannot perform any operation on a variable which is null. That's why it generated null pointer exception that was suitably handled in this particular parent exception handler. Then the rest of the code statement got executed. This is the second example with respect to multiple catch. So we shall try to see one more example with respect to multiple catch. So far, as you can see in the example, so far we are writing the specific exception handler first. Then we are writing the parent exception handler. So this is the hierarchy we are following. So what will happen if I write parent exception handler first, then the specific exception handler? What will happen? That we are going to see with the help of one more Java program. So let us go to the package and let us create a class. Let us create a class multiple catch 3. So I will create a main method here. I will create a main method. Inside my main method, I will write the try block. Here, I will try to generate an arithmetic exception. As you can see, when you try to divide a number by 0, it will generate an arithmetic exception. Now what I will do, I will write my parent exception handler first. So this is of parent exception handler. So after writing the parent exception handler, I will write my specific exception handler, that is of arithmetic exception type. I will write the specific exception handler, specific exception handler. Then I will write the RAS statement. If my exception is properly handled, it will print the rest of the code. It will print rest of the code. But as you can see here, when I write my specific exception handler, after the parent exception handler, it is giving me an error. So what error it is giving? Unreachable code for arithmetic exception. It is already handled by the catch block for exception. That means when an exception gets raised here, it will be handled by this particular catch block itself. So there is no need to write this particular catch block. So this is unreachable code. It never gets reached. It never gets executed. So if a piece of code never gets reached or never gets executed, then especially with respect to try catch block, then this will give me an error. So that's why you should always write your specific exception handler before the parent exception handler. So let me write this specific exception handler before the parent exception handler. As you can see, now the error got disappeared. Why? When an exception gets generated now, it will be handled by the specific exception handler. This particular exception can handle any type of exception. So that's why it can be reached for other scenarios. So that's why it won't generate an error here. So that's why you should always maintain the hierarchy of writing the specific exception handler first. Later on, you should write the catch block of parent exception handler. So when I run this particular program, the exception will be suitably caught and it will print java.lang.arithmetic exception. Then the rest of the code statement will be printed. So these are all the things you need to remember with respect to multiple catch. So basically, why we use multiple catch? So multiple catch is used to handle multiple exceptions. So in a single try block, it can generate multiple exceptions, but at any one point of time, only one exception will be generated and thrown. That will be handled by the group of one catch block. In a group of catch block, one of the catch block will handle the exception generated and thrown. All your catch block must be ordered from specific to general. You should write the specific exception handler first. Later on, you should write the generic exception handler. So we covered 3 important programs with respect to multiple catch. Now we shall go to another. This exception handling concept is very much vast. It contains many concepts. So, but all those concepts in exception handling are very important. That's why we should make sure that we cover all those concepts in a greater detail along with the programs. So next we are going to start with other concept of exception handling, which is nested try block. As the name itself suggests, nested means one inside another. That means a try block will be inside another try block. A try block will be inside another try block. That is called as nested try block. So if you are writing a try block inside another try block, it is called as nested try block. So the next question that might come to your mind is that why we need nested try block? The reason for this is sometimes usually in your code, there will be scenarios in which a part of a block, one particular part of block, or one particular portion of code, it might generate one error, and the entire block might generate another error. A part of block may cause one error. Sometimes a situation may arise where a part of a block may cause one error, and the entire block itself may cause another error. In such a case, exception handlers have to be nested. So that means the part of block which is generating an error can be written in nested try. The entire block might generate an error that can be written in outer try block. So you will get a clear picture about this particular nested try when we execute a simple program in Eclipse. So let us try to execute a simple program in Eclipse in order to understand how nested try works. So I will go to the package exception handling. Inside my exception handling package, I will create a class. So let me name the class as nested try 1. So I will create a main method in this particular class. I will create a main method. Inside my main method, I will create a try block. I'm creating a try block now. So I will create one more try block. This is what is called as nesting. So I'm creating a try block inside another try block. So here I will write a code int a is equal to 20 divided by 0. As you all know, when you try to divide a number by 0, it will generate arithmetic exception. So let's handle this arithmetic exception suitably. Arithmetic exception. So I'll print a description of that particular exception. So as you can see, this is my nested try catch. So inside a try block, I am having one try and catch. So which is generating arithmetic exception, and it is also getting handled suitably. Now I will write one more try. So there are two tries which are getting nested. This is the first try inside outer try. This is the second try block inside outer try. Here what I will do, I will try to create an array. Let's create an array with 5 elements, which can store 5 elements. Now what I will do, I will try to access the fifth index. So the indexes will be only from 0 to 4, but you are trying to access the fifth index. So that's why when you try to access the fifth index, it will generate an array index out of bound exception. So array index out of bounds exception, array index out of bound exception. So that exception will be caught and the information will be printed. So as you can see, inside this try block, there are two nested tries. This first try, nested try, is generating an arithmetic exception, and it is suitably being handled by the arithmetic exception catch block. This second nested try is generating array index out of bound exception, and it is suitably being handled by the array index out of bound exceptions. Then what I will do, for this outer try block also, I need to write a catch block. This is my outer try block. So for this also, I will write a catch block. I will write a parent exception handler. Then I will print the description of the exception. No exception is getting generated in my outer try block. So when no exception is getting generated, your outer own try block won't be executed. Simply I will print SYSO outer try block. So then I will go to the last statement. So if all my exceptions are handled suitably, I will just print the rest of the code. So let us analyze what happens here. So first it will go to the outer try. There are no statements to be executed in the outer try. So it will come to first inner try. Here arithmetic exception gets generated. It will be handled suitably. It goes to the second outer try. Here array index out of bound exception occurs. It is handled suitably. Since no exception is getting generated in the outer try, because there are no statements in the outer try. There are two try statements, but no independent statements in the outer try. So there won't be any exceptions in the independent outer try. So it will come directly here and it will print rest of the code. So when I try to run this particular program, so as you can see from the console, firstly arithmetic exception is getting generated, then array index out of bound is exception is getting generated, that is handled. When both the exceptions are handled, it comes to the last line of the program and it will print rest of the code. So this is how you can write a nested try program. So the nested try will have some variations. So this is a basic syntax of nested try, how you can write nested try. That means inside outer try, you can write many nested try catch block. There are some other variations with respect to nested try. The first variation is like below. That means what will happen? So what I will do now, so I will try to perform multiple nesting. I will try to perform multiple nesting. So what do you mean by multiple nesting? I will create an outer try block. I will create an outer try. Then I will create an inner try block. So that means which is getting nested. Inside that I will create one more try block. So there is an outer try block, inner try block 1 and inner try block 2. So in such a case, so assume the hierarchy. So I will explain this with a Java program, then you will get a clear picture. Now just assume the hierarchy now. There is an outer try, there is an inner try 1, there is an inner try 2. So if an exception is not handled in your inner try 2, inner try block 2, it moves to inner try block 1. There also if it is not handled, then it will move to the outer try block. So for that we are going to write a Java program. As you can see, if an exception is not handled in inner try block 2, it moves to inner try block 1. If not handled also, there also it moves to outer try block. So let us understand this with the help of a Java program. So I will go to the package. I will right click on it. So after right clicking, I will create a class. So let me create a class, new class. So let me name the class as nested try 2, nested try 2. Then I will create a main method. I will create a main method. After creating a main method, I will creating a outer try block. So this is my outer try. So let me comment it so that you will get a clear understanding. So this is my outer try block. This is my outer try block. So inside this outer try, I am creating one more try. So this try. So this is inner try block 1. Inner try block 1. Inner try block 1. Inside this inner try block, I am creating one more try block. So inner try block 2. I am creating inner try block 2. That is one more try block. That is nesting inside nesting. So I am performing 2 levels of nesting. So this is my outer try block. This is my inner try block 1. Inside this inner try block, I am writing one more try block. Now what I will do, I will create an array. So let me initialize the elements to this particular array. Let me initialize the elements. So I am creating 1, 2, 3, 4. So I am assigning 4 elements to the array. Now what I will do, I will try to print array of 10. Is this index available? It is not available. Why it is not available? Because there are only 4 indexes which are declared. Array of 0, array of 1, array of 2, array of 3. But you are trying to print an element in an index 10 which is not available. So it will generate array index out of bound exception. So now what I will do, for this particular catch block, I will write an arithmetic exception. I will write an arithmetic exception handler. Arithmetic exception. I have written an arithmetic exception. But the exception which is getting generated in my inner try block is array index out of bound exception. but I have written an arithmetic exception handler. This is my inner try. This is my outer try. So this is my, sorry, inner try block 1. This is my inner try block 1. For this inner try block 1 also, for this inner try block 1, here I will write one more statement. I will write one more statement, SYSO. This is inner try block 2, inner try block 2. This is my inner try block 2. For this inner try block 1, I will write one more catch block. I will write one more catch block. Catch. Here also I will write arithmetic exception catch block. Arithmetic exception catch block. Arithmetic exception catch block. I will print the description. Then I will write a statement. This is inner try block 1. Inner try block 1. Inner try block 1. So as you can see, there is two levels of nesting. This is my outer try. This is inner try block 1. This is inner try block 2. In your inner try block 2, it is generating an array index out of bound exception. But for this inner try block 2, we are having an arithmetic exception handler. Also for this inner try block 1, we are having an arithmetic exception handler. So ಇಲ್ಲಿ generate ಆಗಿರುವಂತ array index out of bound exception ಗೆ, for this array index out of bound exception which was generated, there is no catch block till yet. Till yet there is no catch block. Now what I will do, I will go to the outer try catch block. I will go to the outer try catch block. So here in my outer try catch block, what I will do, I will write a catch block. I will write a catch block with array index out of bound exception. Array index out of bounds exception. Array index out of bound exception. Then I will try to print the description of that particular. Then I will write which block it's this, outer exception handler. Outer try block. Outer try block. Then I will also write one more catch block of specific parent exception handler. Exception E. This is for outer try. SYSO E. SYSO E. This is my outer parent exception handler. Outer try block parent exception handler. Outer try block parent exception handler. So then I will have a statement. So if the exception is suitably handled, it will come to this particular line. If the exception is not handled suitably, it won't come to this line at all. Only if the exception is suitably handled, it will come to this particular line, then it will print the rest of the code anta avag matra print madutte. So here let us understand what actually happens. So first we enter the outer try block. There is no code here. It will go to the inner try block. There is no code here. It will come to the inner try block 2. There is some code. So this will generate an array index out of bound exception. So it will go to the catch, this particular catch block. This is of arithmetic exception. Exception won't be handled. It goes to the inner try block 1 catch block. This is also of arithmetic exception. It won't be handled. Then it comes to the outer try block. This is of array index out of bound exception. Here your exception will be handled suitably. So once the exception is handled suitably, it will come here. Then it will print rest of the code anadna print madutte. So when I execute this particular program, as you can see, when I execute this particular program and check, as you can see, index 10 out of bound, it is coming here. Then it is printing index 10 out of bound for length 4. Then it is also printing outer try block. That means the exception which was raised in my inner try block 2 is handled in the outer try block. Then once the exception is handled correctly, it will come to the last line and it prints rest of the code. So this is how you can write the variation of nested try. So this is my first nested try where we wrote 2 nested try inside one try block. This is our second nested try program where we saw how an exception which was generated in the inner try block 2 first goes to this particular exception handler. If it is not handled, it goes to inner try block 1 exception handler. If it is not handled, it comes to the outer try block exception handler. Here it is handled. If it is not handled here also, it will be handled in the parent exception handler of outer try block. This is how you can write a nested try. So far in this particular class, we saw 3 multiple catch programs and 2 nested try programs. So that's all you need to remember with respect to multiple catch and nested try. Now we will move on to one more keyword of exception handling, that is finally. So finally is basically used after try catch block. So it is mainly used to perform some cleanup operations. So the intention of using finally is whatever might be the situation, that is if your exception is handled or if it is not handled. And try catch block exception handle agbodu athava agdene irbodu. Whatever might be the case, the statements inside finally block will get executed for sure. Finally block ಒಳಗಿರುವಂತ statement execute ಆಗೇ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. So that's why the statements you are writing in your finally block will usually perform some cleanup processing, some cleanup activity. So finally block is a block used to execute important code such as closing the connection. Because if your program gets terminated abruptly, imagine in program abrupt agi terminate ಆಯ್ತು without the exception being handled. ನೀವು exception handle ಆಗದೇನೆ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮು ಅಬ್ರಪ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಟರ್ಮಿನೇಟ್ ಆಗೋಯ್ತು. In such a case, what will happen? So if a connection is established, adu close agirade illa. So that connection won't be available to other processes. So that's why even if your exception is not handled, there are some operation which needs to be performed. That will be done in the finally block, which gets executed for sure 100%. So Java finally block is always executed whether an exception is handled or not. Therefore, it contains all the necessary statements that needs to be printed regardless of the exception occurs or not. The finally block will usually follow the try catch block. Main uses of finally block will be used to perform some cleanup operation such as closing a file, closing a connection. The important statements to be printed can be placed in the finally block. So that means ಯಾವ್ದಾದ್ರು ಒಂದು ಫೈಲ್ ನ ಓಪನ್ ಮಾಡಿರ್ತೀರಾ, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮು ಅಬ್ರಪ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಟರ್ಮಿನೇಟ್ ಆಗ್ಬಿಟ್ರೆ ಆ ಫೈಲ್ ಓಪನ್ ಆಗೇ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. So that's why all those important code can be written in the finally block, which gets executed even if the exception is not handled. Exception handle ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೂ finally block ಅಲ್ಲಿರುವಂತ ಎಲ್ಲಾ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಎಕ್ಸಿಕ್ಯೂಟ್ ಆಗೇ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. So there are some scenarios in which your finally block will executed. That means exception not generated. In your try catch block, there is no exception not generated, then finally block gets executed. Exception generated but not handled, then finally block gets executed. Exception generated and handled, then also your finally block will get executed. So let us try to write Java programs for all the 3 scenarios. So when we write Java program for all the 3 scenarios, you will get a clear understanding. So I will go to Eclipse. I will go to my exception handling package. I will go to new class. So let me create a class called as finally one. Finally one anta one class create ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ, finally one. So here what I will do in finally one. So first scenario, what is the first scenario? Exception not generated. When an exception is not generated, then also my finally block needs to get executed. So for that, what I will do, I will go to Eclipse. Here I will write the main method. So here I will write my try block. Inside my try block, I will write a code int a is equal to 20 divided by 5. So 20 divided by 5 will be 4. So that gets stored. Then I will print the value of a. Then I will write a catch block. I will write a catch block. So let me write the catch block as arithmetic exception. Arithmetic exception. Arithmetic exception E. I will print the description of that exception if it is raised. But in this case, there is no exception that will be generated because you are not dividing the number by 0. It just performs a division operation and stores the quotient, which is 4 to variable A. So then I will write the finally block. Finally block. Here I will write finally block executes when even executing when no exception is generated. Correct alva? So you can see in this particular program, this try block won't generate any exception. So we won't go to the catch block. So if we want to go to the catch block, then it will come to the finally. So finally block executing when no exception generated. Then finally I will print the rest of the code on statement na print martin. The rest of the code. What will happen now? Since no exception is generated, it will print finally block executing when no exception is generated. Then it will also print rest of the code. When I run this particular program and check the console, as you can see, the output print ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಐತೆ 20 divided by 4 then it comes to finally block executing when no exception is generated rest of the code. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಂಗೆ ಯಾವುದೇ exception generate ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರು ನನ್ನ finally block execute ಆಗ್ತಾ ಐತೆ. So next what we will do, we will generate an exception, but we won't handle the exception. ನಾನು exception ನ generate ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ but exception ನ handle ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ. ಅವಾಗ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ observe ಮಾಡೋಣ. So let me go to the package. I'll create one more class. Let me name the class as finally2. I will create the main method. So inside this main method, I will write my try block. I'm writing the try block. Here I'm writing a statement called as int a is equal to 20 divided by 0. So what this will do, this will generate an exception because we are trying to divide a number by 0. It will generate an arithmetic exception. But what I will write a catch block, but I'm writing array index out of bounds exception handler. So that means you are generating an exception here. It generates an arithmetic exception, but you are not handling the exception. Then also your finally block will execute it. Finally block will get executed. I'm writing finally SYSO. Finally executing when exception generated but not handled. So what happens here, this will generate an arithmetic exception. That particular arithmetic exception object will be thrown to the catch block. So when it is thrown to the catch block, it won't be handled because the particular catch block can handle array index out of bound exception. So your program will get terminated abruptly. But before the program gets terminated abruptly, it will print the statement in the finally block. Then I will print one more code, which is called as the rest of the code. So let me run this particular program. So let me run it. So when I run this particular program, as you can see, an arithmetic exception is getting generated, but it is not being handled properly. When an exception is not handled properly, your program gets terminated abruptly without executing the rest of the code. In that case also, the statements in the finally block will get executed. That's why it has printed finally executing when exception generated but not handled. Then the program terminates abruptly without executing the rest of the code. So your finally block gets executed when exception is not generated at all. Your finally block gets executed when an exception is generated but not handled. Your finally block will also get executed when an exception is generated and handled. So let us try to execute the program for that scenario also. I will go to the package. I will create new class. So let me name it as finally 3. Finally 3. I will write the main method. After writing the main method, what I will do, I will write the try block. Here I will write a statement int a is equal to 20 divided by 0. It generates an arithmetic exception. So I will write an arithmetic exception handler. Arithmetic exception handler. I will print the description of that exception. Then I will go to finally. Here I will write finally executing when exception generated handled. Exception generate agayte adna handle madidini. So next I will go to SYSO. I will print the rest of the code. So when I run this particular program, here an arithmetic exception is generated. We are having a catch block with the same exception handler. So it will get handled properly. Then it will go to finally. It will print finally executing when exception generated and handled. Since your exception was handled properly in this program, it will also execute the rest of the code statement. So when I run this particular program and check the output, as you can see, it is generated an arithmetic exception that was printed in the catch block, then finally block executed, then rest of the code statement executed. So this is the major usage of your finally block. It is mainly used to perform some cleanup operations. So far we have covered 3 main concepts. First we covered multiple catch. So we saw some programs on multiple catch. Later on we covered nested try. We saw some programs on nested try. Now lastly we covered finally block. Now we are going to cover throw block. So let us cover Java throw. Then we can wrap up this particular session. So why throw keyword is used? So as you can see in this particular example, here an exception gets generated. Which exception? Arithmetic exception. But the exception object being created. So whenever an exception gets generated, this will create an arithmetic exception. This will create an arithmetic exception object, and it will be thrown implicitly. That means manually there is no need to throw the arithmetic exception object. When it is thrown, it will go to the corresponding catch block. But if I want to throw the arithmetic exception object manually, arithmetic exception object na nanu manually enaru throw ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಇದ್ರೆ, then I can make use of throw keyword. So the Java throw keyword is used to throw an exception explicitly, or I can say manually. If you want to throw an exception explicitly or manually, you can make use of Java throw keyword. We specify the exception object which is to be thrown. The exception has some message with it that provides the error description. The main intention of using the throw keyword ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ, ಇದು ಬೇಸಿಕಲಿ ನೀವು ಯೂಸರ್ ಡಿಫೈನ್ಡ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಹ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಲರ್ಸ್ಗೆ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಏನು ಯೂಸರ್ ಡಿಫೈನ್ಡ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಹ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಲರ್ಸ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ, ಕಸ್ಟಮ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಹ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಲರ್ಸ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ we are going to see in our next class. So I will give a brief description. So as you can see here, these are all inbuilt exception classes. In a similar manner, I can create exceptions of our own class. So nandu one class ke exception na create ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬಹುದು, but all needs to be subclass of any of the exception class. So ಈಗಿರುವಂತ ಇನ್ಬಿಲ್ಟ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಗಳಿಗೆ ನಾನ್ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಮಾಡುವಂತ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಗಳು ಸಬ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸಸ್ ಆಗಿರಬೇಕು. So in such a case, there might be reasons to throw an exception object manually. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಆಗಿರುವಂತ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ನ ಮ್ಯಾನ್ಯುಯಲ್ ಆಗಿ ಥ್ರೋ ಮಾಡೋ ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ವೆನ್ ಯು ಥ್ರೋ ಎನ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮ್ಯಾನ್ಯುಯಲಿ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವು ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಪ್ರೊವೈಡ್ ಎ ಮೆಸೇಜ್. ಸೊ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಸ್ಪೆಸಿಫೈ ಎ ಮೆಸೇಜ್, ವೈ ದಿಸ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟೆಡ್, ಏನ್ ಇಶ್ಯೂ ಆಯ್ತು ಅಂತ ಆ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ನು ಸಹ ಪಾಸ್ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು. So that's why your throw keyword becomes useful at that particular moment. So we can throw both type of exceptions. That is checked exception nu throw ಮಾಡಬಹುದು, unchecked exceptions nu ಸಹ throw ಮಾಡಬಹುದು. So we already know what do you mean by checked exception and unchecked exception ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು ಅಂತ ಗೊತ್ತು. So main agi, as I already explained, mainly we will be using the throw keyword to throw a custom exception. ನಮ್ದು ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಹ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಲರ್ಸ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ನಾನು ಓನ್ ಆಗಿ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಲ್ಲ, ಇನ್ಬಿಲ್ಟ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಹ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಲರ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ದೇನೆ ಆ ಕಸ್ಟಮ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ಥ್ರೋ ಮಾಡಕ್ಕೆ ಐ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ಯೂಸಿಂಗ್ ಎ ಕೀವರ್ಡ್ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ as throw keyword. So we can define our own set of condition and throw an exception explicitly using the throw keyword. So whenever if I want to throw an exception explicitly, ನಂದು ಏನೋ ಒಂದು ಸೆಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಂಡೀಷನ್ಸ್ ನ ಡಿಫೈನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತೇನೆ. Based on those set of conditions, I can throw an exception explicitly. A condition satisfy ಆದ್ರೆ exceptions ನ throw ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ, condition satisfy ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೆ exception ನ create ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ. That means ಇಲ್ಲಿ exception ಏನಕ್ಕೆ create ಆಯ್ತು? Because you are trying to divide a number by 0. That's why an exception got created. Similarly, I will define a set of condition. If the set of condition is not matched, I will create an exception object. Then I will throw the exception object using throw keyword by passing some description. That is the intention for using the Java throw keyword. So let us try to write an exception. So this particular exception is throwing an unchecked exception. So what do you mean by unchecked exception ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು ಅಂತ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ನೀವು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು. unchecked exceptions ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು? ನಿಮ್ದು arithmetic exceptions, array index, out of bound exception, that is subclass of error and runtime exceptions. Runtime exceptions ಒಳಗಡೆ ಯಾವ್ದಾದ್ರು ಬರುತ್ತೆ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ? We will be having unchecked exceptions ಅಲ್ಲಿ arithmetic exception ಬರುತ್ತೆ, array index, out of bound exceptions ಬರುತ್ತೆ. This all comes under the category of runtime exception. So subclasses of error and runtime exception, that is called as unchecked. Unchecked andre these exceptions will only be checked at runtime. Checked exceptions andre these exceptions will be checked both at runtime as well as compile time. ಯಾವ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ನ ರನ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಮತ್ತೆ ಕಂಪೈಲ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಎರಡು ಟೈಮ್ ಅಲ್ಲೂ ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರೋ ಆ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ನ ಚೆಕ್ಡ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಯಾವ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ನ ಬರೀ ರನ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ ಅದನ್ನ ಅನ್ಚೆಕ್ಡ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀನಿ. ಸೊ ಈಗ ವಿ ಆರ್ ರೈಟಿಂಗ್ ಒನ್ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ ವೇರ್ ವಿ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ಥ್ರೋಯಿಂಗ್ ಎನ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್. ಸೊ ದಟ್ ಪರ್ಟಿಕ್ಯುಲರ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ಅನ್ಚೆಕ್ಡ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್. ಯಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಅನ್ಚೆಕ್ಡ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್? those exceptions which are subclass of error and runtime exception. So let us see how we can write a Java program for that. I will go to the package, then I will go to new class. I will write it as throw1 anta barkotini, throw1. I will write the main method. Inside my main method I'm trying to create a condition. So let me create a condition. So I won't write, I am not writing the try block, I am just creating a condition. So first I am demonstrating how to use the throw keyword. So I will check whether, so inside my main method I will call a method called as eat. Eat anta one method call ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. So this is a method. So bracket ಅಲ್ಲಿ I am passing the age ನ ಪಾಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೇನೆ. So let me write the definition of eat method. Definition ಬರೀತೀನಿ. So public static void eat method. This is the age I am passing. So why this particular eat method is static? Because as you can see in a main method in the normal method ತರ call ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. So when it is static, for all the objects you can directly call this particular method through the class itself. ಬೇರೆ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಮುಖಾಂತರನೇ ಕಾಲ್ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು. ನಾನು ಸೇಮ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಈ ಎರಡೂ ಮೆಥಡ್ ಥ್ರೋ ಒನ್ ಅನ್ನೋ ಸೇಮ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಒಳಗೆ ಐತೆ. ಅವಾಗ ಮೈನ್ ಮೆಥಡ್ ಮುಖಾಂತರ ನಾರ್ಮಲ್ ಆಗಿ ಈಟ್ ಅಂತ ಕಾಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು. ವೆನ್ ಯು ಮೇಕ್ ಇಟ್ ಆಸ್ ಸ್ಟಾಟಿಕ್, ಇಫ್ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಸ್ಟಾಟಿಕ್ ಇಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಜನರೇಟ್ ಎನ್ ಎರರ್. as you can see it is generating an error. That's why if it is static, then inside the same class you can call eat method directly like this. You are passing the age here, age. So 3 gets copied to age. Age ge 3 copy ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಏಜ್ ನ ಕಂಪೇರ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಇಫ್ ಏಜ್ ಇಸ್ ಲೆಸ್ ದೆನ್ ಆರ್ ಈಕ್ವಲ್ ಟು 4 ಅಂತ ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಏಜ್ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಲೆಸ್ ದೆನ್ ಆರ್ ಈಕ್ವಲ್ ಟು 4 ಅಂತ. ಏಜ್ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಲೆಸ್ ದೆನ್ ಆರ್ ಈಕ್ವಲ್ ಟು 4 ಆಗಿದ್ರೆ ದಟ್ ಮೀನ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ ದಿಸ್ ಕೇಸ್ 3 is less than or equal to 4. ಅವಾಗ ನಾನು ಒಂದು ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ನ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. as you can see I am creating an arithmetic exception object. arithmetic exception object ನ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. arithmetic exception. I can also pass any messages. ಯಾವ ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೂ ಪಾಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು. ಏನ್ ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ಪಾಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ? ಡೋಂಟ್ ಈಟ್ ಚಾಕ್ಲೇಟ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಪಾಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಏಕೆ? ಏಜು ಲೆಸ್ ದೆನ್ ಆರ್ ಈಕ್ವಲ್ ಟು 4 ಇದೆ. ಎಲ್ಸ್ ಐ ವಿಲ್ ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ಏಜ್ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಗ್ರೇಟರ್ ದೆನ್ 4 ಆಗಿದ್ರೆ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಈಟ್ ಚಾಕ್ಲೇಟ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಈಟ್ ಚಾಕ್ಲೇಟ್ಸ್. ಸೊ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಕೋಡ್ ನ ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಕೋಡ್. So what I am doing, I am trying to create an exception when my age, based on a set of conditions, this is the condition I have specified. If my age is less than or equal to 4, it will create an arithmetic exception. So new anta use ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ it will create an object. This arithmetic exception is an inbuilt class. ಈ inbuilt class ಗೆ new operator ನ use ಮಾಡಿ you will create an object. That particular object will be thrown with the help of a keyword called as throw. You will throw the object with some description. So don't eat chocolate ಅನ್ನೋ description ಜೊತೆ arithmetic exception object ನ throw ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ. So when I execute this particular program, okay, so check the console. As you can see, it has generated an exception. So arithmetic exception. Since we have not handled the exception, so ನನ್ನ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮು ಅಬ್ರಪ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಟರ್ಮಿನೇಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಐತೆ. ರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಕೋಡ್ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. So this is how you can manually create an exception and throw it with the help of throw keyword. So java.long.arithmetic exception generate ಆಗೈತೆ. ಜೊತೆಗೆ ನಾನು ಪಾಸ್ ಮಾಡಿರುವಂತ ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ರಿಪ್ಷನ್ ಸಹ ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಐತೆ. ಡೋಂಟ್ ಈಟ್ ಚಾಕ್ಲೇಟ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನೋ ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ರಿಪ್ಷನ್. This is my stack trace. ಎಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಮೆಥಡ್ ಕಾಲ್ ಆಗಿತ್ತು ಅಂತ. As you can see, you called eat method from line number 15. Then at line number 8, the exception is getting generated. So this is how you can make use of throw keyword to create an exception object and also pass a message. You can pass any message here. So let us see one more example. So let us see one more throw program. Now what we will do andre, in this particular throw program, we shall try to handle the exception. So before that, so this is an this arithmetic exception is unchecked exception. Now let us try to throw a checked exception. So if we throw a checked exception using throw keyword, it is must to handle the exception using catch block, or the method must declare it using throws declaration. That means ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು unchecked exception use ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. When you throw an unchecked exception, there is no need to handle the unchecked exception. But if you are throwing a checked exception, ನಾನೇನಾದ್ರು ಒಂದು checked exception ನ ಥ್ರೋ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರೆ, then you should handle that particular checked exception na handle ಮಾಡಲೇಬೇಕು. So let us try to understand how we can do with the help of a Java program. So I will go to new class. Your file not found exception, your null pointer exceptions are all examples for checked exceptions. Those exceptions are not subclasses of exception class. Exception class to subclass allavu. So what I will do now, I will create a class called as throw2 anta one class create ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. Then what I will do, I will create a main method. I will create the main method. So let me create a main method. MA control space. Here I will call a method. So what I will do, I will try to call a method called as eat anta on method na call ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀನಿ. I'm trying to call a method called as eat. So here I will write the definition of eat method. Public static void eat method. So what I will do, I will try to read a file reader, file equals new file reader. I will specify the path. Go to D drive ಒಳಗೆ ಹೋಗು. D drive ಒಳಗೆ sun.txt ಅಂತ ಫೈಲ್ ನ ಫೆಚ್ ಮಾಡೋಣ. there is no file. sun.txt ಅಂತ D drive ಒಳಗೆ ಯಾವುದೇ ಫೈಲ್ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಫೈಲ್ ರೀಡರ್ ಅನ್ನೋ ಇನ್ಬಿಲ್ಟ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ಗೆ IO ಪ್ಯಾಕೇಜ್ ನ ಇಂಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು. ಸೊ ಲೆಟ್ ಮಿ ಇಂಪೋರ್ಟ್ java.io.star. import java.io.star. So file reader. So as you can see, it is giving me an error now. What error it is giving? So when you check here, it is saying that add throws declaration or surround with try catch block. So this particular statement will generate an exception. So let me throw the exception. So which exception it is getting generated? File not found. File not found exception. File not found exception. So what happens here? File not found exception. So when you try to throw an object, of checked exception, this is a checked exception, file not found. So avaga this needs to be surrounded by try catch block, or it should define this particular method should define. E method helbeku what exception this method might generate annadna helbeku. So here for that to happen, I can use a keyword called as throws anta one keyword use ಮಾಡಬಹುದು. So I can write it as throws file not found exception. Throws file not found exception. That means this particular method enide, so now as you can see, now the error got disappeared. So whenever a checked exception gets generated, either you should surround that checked exception with try catch block, or this method should tell what exception this will generate. So for that you can use a keyword called as throws ಅನ್ನೋ keyword na use ಮಾಡಬಹುದು. So this throws keyword will tell what exception the eat method might generate. The throws keyword is now telling the eat method might generate file not found exception. So then your error gets disappeared. So that is what has been mentioned here. When you throw a checked exception using throw keyword, it is must to handle the exception using catch block, or the method must declare it using throws declaration. Now declare ಮಾಡಿದ throws use ಮಾಡಿ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಏನು ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಆಗಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಬಟ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಆಯ್ತು. ಏನ್ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಆಯ್ತು? ಈ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ರೈಸ್ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಈಟ್ ಅಂತ ಕಾಲ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ there is an exception which is raised, but it is not handled ಅಂತ ಬಂತು. So always the checked exceptions needs to be handled. Why? Because your checked exceptions are checked both at compile time as well as run time, whereas your unchecked exception was checking only at run time. That's why adna handle ಮಾಡಲೇಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋ ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಇಲ್ಲ ಯಾವುದನ್ನ unchecked exceptions na. But your checked exception, since it is checked at compile time, if an exception is getting generated, it needs to be handled. That's why unhandled exception type file not found exception. Here on the exception generate ಆಗ್ತೈತೆ, ಅದನ್ನ ನೀವು ಹ್ಯಾಂಡಲ್ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ, ಹ್ಯಾಂಡಲ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೈತೆ. So let me write this particular eat method call inside try block. I'm writing it inside try block. Catch exception E. SO E. Next, what I will do, I will print the rest of the code. As you can see, all the error got disappeared now. So whenever you are throwing, so what happens now? You will come inside try block, you will call the eat method. This eat method will tell this will generate file not found exception na generate ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳುತ್ತೆ. So see, it is giving me an error because this will generate an exception. So when a checked exception is getting generated, either you should cover this with try and catch block, or you should mention in the method which exception it might throw. That's why what I will do, I will do Control Z. Now the error gets disappeared. So this eat method will tell, it will generate file not found exception. So you will try to assign file on object na ee path ge assign madak nodtira sun.txt ke, but this file is not available. So this will generate an exception. That exception you are throwing, file not found exception na throw ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀರಾ. So when you throw the exception, since the eat method was called inside try catch block, the exception will come here, exception will be handled suitably, then the rest of the code statements gets printed. When I run this particular program and check the console, as you can see, java.io file not found, dsun dot, the system cannot find the file specified, rest of the code print ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. So whenever you are throwing an object, so whenever if you throw a checked exception, whenever you throw a checked exception, either you should mention what type of exception this method might throw, or you should close your method inside try catch block. Then only your checked exception will be handled suitably. This may not be the case with respect to unchecked exception. As you can see here, it won't generate any error because your unchecked exception will be checked only at runtime. That's why the error will be generated at runtime. But here in checked exception, the error gets generated because your checked exception will be checked both at compile time as well as runtime. That's why your checked exception needs to be surrounded with the try catch block, or your checked exception method should throw what type of exception it will generate. So we covered two programs on throw keyword. So first program, we created an object of unchecked exception, that is arithmetic exception. Then we throw that object. Then we created an exception of checked exception, that is file not found exception. So whenever you are throwing a checked exception, make sure that you are writing it inside try catch block, or you are using the throws keyword for the method. But the actual essence of your throw keyword will be realized when you are throwing an user defined exception, because anyhow this inbuilt exception will be thrown manually, but this user defined exception you can throw with the help of throw keyword, and also you can provide a description. What exception getting generated and thrown ಅನ್ನೋ description na provide ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬಹುದು. So whatever the exception, ನೀವೇನೇ user defined exception na create ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು, everything will come under the throwable class. That is the topmost parent exception class, throwable. ಎಲ್ಲ exceptions ಗಳು ನೀವೇನೇ user defined exception class na ನೀವು create ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು, every user defined exceptions will come under the throwable class. So let us create a Java program to understand how we can create a user defined exception and throw that particular exception object. So I will go to class. So let me create throw3 anta one create ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. So I will create one more class. So let me create a class user defined exception. First exception class na create ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು, because ಈ arithmetic exception, array index out of bound exception, file not found, null pointer exception, they are inbuilt exception classes. For those exception classes, an object will get created when an exception is generated. So that's why first we should create our user defined exception class. So let me create my user defined exception class. So on user defined exception class na create ಮಾಡ್ಕೋತೀನಿ. So this user defined exception class will extend exception. So ಈ ತರ ಬರುತ್ತ ತಕ್ಷಣ ನಿಮ್ user defined exception ಒಂದು exception class ಆಗಿ convert ಆಯ್ತು ಅಂತ, because exception is an inbuilt class. So now user defined exception became a parent class of exception class. So here I will write a constructor. So let me write the constructor. My constructor name is user defined exception. That is, the constructor is having same name as that of the class. Here I will pass a string. One string na pass ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. This is a parameterized constructor. Parameter pass ಆಗಿದೆ. So ಆ string ನಾನು super class ಗೆ pass ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. So super of str ಅಂದ್ರೆ we already saw the use of super keyword. So that means super ಅಂದ್ರೆ it will go to exception class. Inside exception class only it will pass str method. So there is an constructor inside exception class which will obtain one string obtain ಮಾಡುವಂತ ಒಂದು ಕನ್ಸ್ಟ್ರಕ್ಟರ್ ಇದೆ. ಆ ಕನ್ಸ್ಟ್ರಕ್ಟರ್ ಗೆ str ನ ಪಾಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. So this is my class definition. This is my user defined exception class definition. Now we'll come to the throw class. Here I will write the main method. Inside my main method I will write the try block. So in try block I will create an exception. So throw new ಈ particular class to ಈ particular exception class to exception create ಮಾಡ್ತೇನೆ. So throw new user defined exception, throw new user defined exception. I will also pass a message. This is an user defined exception. This is an user defined exception ಅಂತ pass ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. So inside my try block, I'm creating an object. I'm creating an exception object because user defined exception anta ಏನು user defined a class ಇದೆ, that is an exception class to subclass. So this created an exception object. This exception object will be thrown. So this exception object will be thrown to where it will be thrown. It will be thrown to the catch block. It will be thrown to the catch block. So ಈ message user defined, as soon as you create an object for this particular user defined exception, it will call the constructor. So ಈ message str pass ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೆ, super of str ಗೆ ಹೋಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. That means ಅಲ್ಲಿ assignment ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. Now what I will do, exception, let me write the specific exception. That means user defined exception, user defined exception. Here I will print caught exception. So we caught the exception caught ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ, caught exception. Then I will print a line syso. Let me write, this is an user defined UDE ಅಂತ ಬರ್ತದೆ, user UDE. ಸೊ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನನಗೆ ಒಂದು ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಅದು ಥ್ರೋ ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಥ್ರೋ ಆದಾಗ ಅದ್ರ ರೆಫರೆನ್ಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಈ ರೆಫರೆನ್ಸ್ ಮುಖಾಂತರ ಐ ವಿಲ್ ಟ್ರೈ ಟು ಫೆಚ್ ದ ಮೆಸೇಜ್ UDE.get message, UDE.get message. So here you are trying to create an exception object by throwing this particular message. So when you create an exception object by throwing this particular message, it will go to the constructor, then it will call the super class constructor, that is exception class constructor, then the initialization will take place. So ನಾನು get message ಅಂತ ಕಾಲ್ ಮಾಡಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ನಾನು ಇನ್ನೇನು ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ಪಾಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಈ ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದು ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂಡಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ನಾನು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಗೆಟ್ ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ಕಾಲ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ನಾನು ಯಾವ ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ನ ಕಳಿಸಿರ್ತೀನಿ ಆ ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ವೆನ್ ಐ ಎಕ್ಸಿಕ್ಯೂಟ್ ದಿಸ್ ಪರ್ಟಿಕ್ಯುಲರ್ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್, execute and check the console for output, as you can see it is printing caught exception, then it is also printing this is an user defined exception. This is how the throw keyword will come to importance. So your throw keyword will mainly be used with respect to user defined exceptions. So now what we did here, we created an user defined exception class. So how to create an user defined exception class? Create any class, extend with the exception class. Now your any class will become an exception class. So for that exception class, you can create an object and throw that particular object. Whenever you are throwing that particular exception object, you can also pass a message. So if you want to obtain the message you pass through that particular reference of the exception class, you can call get message. So the main essence of throw keyword will come to picture whenever you are using the user defined exception handler. With the help of throw keyword, you can create an object for the user defined exception class, and also you can throw that object to the catch block. So far with respect to throw we covered Many points. Throw is mainly used to throw an exception explicitly or manually. So you can create an exception object and you can throw. You can also create an exception object for the user defined exception class. Then you can throw by providing some messages. Then later on we saw how we can throw an unchecked exception. So when you are throwing an unchecked exception, there is no need to write try catch block. When you are throwing a checked exception, that is file not found exception, you need to write the code inside try catch block, and also you need to specify inside the method what exception this method might throw. Then we saw the main essence of throw keyword, that will be in user defined exception class. So in our next class, we will cover the remaining concepts of exception handling. So the first topic for the next class will be Java exception propagation, that we will cover in our next class. So in this particular class, we covered many concepts with respect to exception handling. First, we covered multi-catch. So there might be chances of multiple exceptions being generated. So, but only one exception will be thrown. For that to be handled, you can have multiple catch block. So we saw some important points to remember with respect to multiple catch. Then we saw nested try. We saw two programs with respect to nested try. Later on, we saw finally block. We saw the different scenarios in which finally block can be used. Lastly, we saw the usage of throw keyword. So how we can throw an unchecked exception, how we can throw a checked exception, how we can throw an user defined exception. So in our next class, we shall cover the remaining concepts of exception handling. So just go through the entire presentation. If you found any doubt with respect to the presentation, you can ping me the doubts, or you can ask me the doubts through call. So I will be able to rectify your doubts. So make sure you execute all the programs we executed in this particular presentation. Thank you.